All right, our next body system to talk about is the skin. And the skin is responsible for lots of things, right? It protects the body from the outside world. It's how the body keeps itself cool. And a couple other things about the skin. Of course, the skin is the largest organ of the body. It covers and protects the body from injury, infection, and water loss. Okay. Some of the ways that the skin protects the body. It is a continuous barrier, basically continuous barrier that keeps disease, pathogens, microorganisms, and harmful substances out, and it keeps water in. So that's one of its biggest roles, right? So we've got this continuous barrier with the exception of some openings that are basically typically where mucous membranes are formed. And then if we have any cuts or anything like that, those would also be breaks in that barrier. But certainly a very, very important part of our ability to resist pathogens and keep the outside world out. Okay. Another job of the skin is to maintain body temperature, and it does that. It is inside, embedded in the skin, are lots and lots of blood vessels, and those blood vessels expand and allow blood flow, which carries heat away from the body. Skin also contains sweat glands, right? So as we perspire, right, that perspiration is water on your skin, and as it evaporates away, that helps keep us cool. Another role of the skin is to help us get rid of wastes. So as we perspire, as we sweat, dissolved in our perspiration are the breakdown products from certain chemical reactions. So we sweat out some of those breakdown products as we get rid of some of the waste from the chemical reactions that take place in our body. There are two major tissues of the skin. So the skin is an organ. Organs are made up of tissues. So we've got both the dermis and the epidermis. And so for the epidermis, we've got that's the outer layer of the skin. So epi is outer, right? Dermal layer. There's no nerves or any blood vessels in the epidermis. In fact, the outermost part of your epidermis is basically dead skin cells. Those outermost dead skin cells are where melanin production has occurred, but it does also, those outermost skin cells are dead, but underneath that, in the epidermis layer, are the cells that produce melanin, and that's what gives our skin pigment, okay? Underneath the epidermis is the dermis, so we've got the outermost layer, then we've got the dermal layer, and just below the dermis is a layer of fat. So this is the layer between the epidermis and that fat layer. The dermis itself is thick compared to the epidermis. It has sweat glands in it. It's where your hair follicles are, oil glands, and this is where we perspire from, right? So perspiration leaves the skin, leaves the dermal layer through pores, and this is also where the strands of hair grow in follicles, is in that dermal layer. Okay. Your skin is again an organ. It's made up of these epidermal dermal tissues. Those are made out of cells. Your skin produces new cells constantly, and you'll have a whole new skin in about a year. It takes for the whole thing to change over. But on a regular basis, your skin produces new cells and repairs itself when we get hurt, right? When we get injured. So we'll see like scabs form. Those scabs form over to produce, or the scab is there to protect the body from pathogens, right? So you get a little scab, closes up the little gaps there. And then skin cells underneath that scab start to multiply, and they'll fill in the gaps, right? They just do a little prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, if you remember that. And then we've got a brand new cell ready to go to fill in that little gap. Okay. And then we also do this artificially with a skin graft. So a skin graft is when you take skin from one part of the body and put it into another. That would be done in the case of severe skin injury, burns and things like that. You may have to do a skin graft. Okay. So again, skin, largest organ of the body. It's got both the epidermis, the outermost layer, the dermal layer, and then a fat layer, and it's got some blood vessels and then some glands and follicles embedded in it as well. And we'll take a look at those next. Okay, so you've got this little cutaway diagram here, and what we're trying to do is just figure out what parts of the skin this is. And then below this, you also have a fill-in. We'll talk about those in just a moment here. So here at the very top, this is this outermost layer of the skin, right? This is what we can see here. And this part right here is the epidermis, right? So we've got this epidermal layer. And then we said below the epidermal layer is the dermis, right? So we're going to grab the dermis and go here. And we can see how much thicker the dermis is than the epidermis. And the dermis sits between the epidermis and then this layer of fatty tissue here below it, right? So that's really the layers on this side. Outer layer epidermis, middle layer is the dermis, and then we've got this layer of fatty tissue here. Okay. In the dermal layer, we can see things like, we can see these blood vessels that are right in here, right? So again, those are carrying these blood vessels. We've got a follicle, right? This hair follicle here next to the blood vessels. Just slide that over just a little bit. Okay. And then with this follicle, we also have like an oil gland here, right? So as we've got oily skin, we've got these oil glands at these follicles here. And then we also might see a sweat gland, again, all in this middle dermal layer here. And then we also said in the epidermis, this is where we get the melanocytes. And again, this is what's going to give our skin some coloration here in these melanocytes. Okay, so those are the major structures of the epidermis. And then just to go over the functions here, again, these will just scroll down where, we've got the melanocytes up here. They create the pigment or the colored substances that give out, like melanin, gives our skin its color. We've got the epidermis, the outermost layer, the dermis, followed by that fatty tissue again. So those are the three on the side here. Oil glands, sweat glands, follicles, and then we've got the blood vessels to wrap it all up, right? So that's the basic functions here of these parts of the skin. Okay, largest organ of the body, covers it, protects it from injury, infection, and water loss.